think we are ready. So let me welcome everybody and say how glad we are to have you here. I'm Skip Cornett, a longtime member of the Interfaith Association and a longtime participant on the program committee. This is a program committee project. Let me tell you real quickly about the Interfaith Association of Central Ohio. It's made up of 9 diverse faiths who have come together for one purpose, and that is to create an interfaith community based on understanding, friendship, and trust. The IACO, as we call it, puts this mission to action by educating the public about customs and practices of different faith traditions, advocating for social justice, peace, and human dignity, promoting interfaith gatherings and events that address local and global concerns, and partnering with other faith and peace-focused organizations. So I'm especially excited about this program this evening because of my history at Lutheran clergy working in Jewish Christian relations for many years, I guess about 20 years now, on behalf of Trinity Lutheran Seminary and our national church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, teaching a class on Jewish Christian relations, and also working with this group that we're hearing from tonight, from the Rabbi Howard Zach, the Main Street Synagogue, Torat Emet, which is down the street from Capital University and Trinity Lutheran Seminary. I've been there a couple of times with students from my class on Jewish Christian relations. We did a summer youth program for a few years, and it's just been really a privilege for me to do this kind of work on Jewish Christian relations. And now I'm really excited that we are doing a broader focus and connection, which is Judaism as part of the interfaith community. And I've been especially privileged to work with my colleague at the Interfaith Association, Steve Edelstein, who is from the Jewish community. He and I have worked together on this for a number of weeks now, and we're really pleased to be able to do this program on Orthodox Judaism. So I will now turn this over to Steve. And Steve, you can start the program and get it going. It's really a great opportunity for all of us, I think. So Steve.
Skip, thank you very much. And really thank you for all that you've done advancing Jewish-Christian relations in our own community. As Skip has indicated, I'm Steve Edelstein. I'm a representative of Jewish Columbus on ICO, on the Interfaith Association of Central Ohio. Our subject this evening is Judaism, the granddaddy of the Abrahamic faiths, an ancient religion which began in the Middle East, became rooted in the historic homeland of the Jewish people, and with the Jews' dispersion spread throughout the world. Today, there are Jews of every color, and they span a spectrum of adherence to beliefs, traditions, and rituals which bind us to the faith and to each other, all the way from secular to religiously observant Orthodox. Tonight, we are indeed fortunate to have Rabbi Howard Zach of Congregation Torat Emet and his students to help us with a better understanding of Orthodox Judaism. Rabbi Zach began his rabbinic career in Oakland, California, where he reestablished Beth Jacob, a mainstream Orthodox congregation, and was the founding visionary of the Gan Matov preschool and the Oakland Hebrew Day School. Here in Columbus, in partnership with Jay and Jeannie Schottenstein, he and his wife Linda were chosen as the founding rabbinic couple at Torat Emet in 2001. The congregation has grown from 60 families, holding their first Shabbat service, the Sabbath, right after 9/11 in a renovated office building, to a community of over 200 families in a state-of-the-art facility with one of the most active programming calendars for a congregation its size in the entire country. Rabbi Zach is on many local and national boards, is an officer of the Rabbinical Council of America, is on the National Advisory Board of AIPAC, and was a member of Governor Kasich's board for faith-based and community initiatives. He has a passion for the rabbinate as a profession and has mentored many young rabbis. Later in the program, Rabbi Zach will be joined by several of his students, who I will reintroduce at that time, but for now I want to welcome them. Hannah Garvin, Yaki Liebesman, Saul Myers, and Yaakov Newman, all students at the Columbus Torah Academy. Just a few other things to note. First of all, people will be muted during the presentation. The program is being recorded and will be available afterwards on our website. The chat box, for those of you that are familiar with it, will be open after the presentation for questions of all of our speakers. And now at this time, it is indeed my profound pleasure to turn the program over to Rabbi Zach. Rabbi?
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Skip and Karen, for both inviting us and for putting together this program. I especially want to thank Yaki, Saul, Hannah, and Yaakov for their bravery in stepping forward and volunteering to participate this evening. Rabbi Tarfon, a first century Common Era sage, said, "The day is short and the work is plentiful." So I'm going to try to jump right in and really just go through a number of thoughts and presentation to give you a foundational understanding both of perhaps Judaism in general, Orthodoxy in particular, and specifically an understanding of what is modern Orthodoxy. Just as a very quick overview, my teacher and the father of modern Orthodoxy in North America, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, really is the foundational person on which much of my thought and presentation is based. And he describes in his philosophy that the modern Orthodox Jew, which he typifies as, he calls it halachic man, from the word halacha, which is the word for Jewish law, which means the way, to go. As in Abraham being told, lech lecha, go forth, halacha is the path that an observant Jew follows, the path of Jewish law. But he says halachic man, or the modern Orthodox man, is the one who is plagued by two opposing tensions. And it is in trying to resolve and never ever being able to fully resolve those tensions in both one's general and religious life that create the creative force and the spiritual force for what he calls the halachic man. So just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, so there is this tension between a Jew feeling both the universal draw as being a member of the human race and being responsible for humanity in general. That's called the universal man. And then the more particular calling of the Jew to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And there's tension between that, between my role as a Jew and my role as a human being sometimes comes into tension. Hopefully not always, and we'll see how that should and shouldn't be in reality. There's likewise tension between the material world and the spiritual pursuits. We all have those tensions. There's tension between contemporary society and religious principles. There's tension between having a relationship with a transcendent, sometimes harsh and always unknowable God, and a relationship with the intimate, loving God who is my partner in faith and in my life. These tensions are tensions that we deal with on a daily basis. And what modern Orthodoxy really represents is that there are both sides to our persona. We don't reject one or the other of these polar tensions. However, there are red lines. There are lines that we can't and don't cross. And that is the halakha. That is the lines of Jewish law. And as we'll see, sometimes those lines are drawn very thin, and sometimes those lines are very broad. That's the end of my philosophic presentation for tonight. The rest of this will be more or less a lesson in Bible studies. So let me begin as follows. I mentioned that, or the theme we wanted to follow is the idea of creation, revelation, and redemption in Judaism. Hold on one second.
Steve, at this time, Rabbi Howard Zach's connection has gone down, so he's not with us anymore. Could you please continue? Kindly unmute Steve.
All right, we are experiencing some technical difficulties with the rabbi's connection.
Okay.
So
I am back.
Welcome.
So
They wanted me to take over your speech. I said, no way.
Hold on one second. I apologize. I prepared
a quick course in rabbinics.
My computer became unplugged and my battery died. So, but I had a backup prepared. So sorry about that.
That's okay.
Hold on one second. Let me just switch to. Oops.
Is this one of those tensions you were referring to, Rabbi? Or?
Yeah, yes. So, okay, forgive me. I apologize. So, creation, revelation, redemption. So let me begin. So it's very interesting. If we look at the biblical story of creation, something that we see right away is that each day of creation, we read, God saw that it was good. Every day he saw that it was good. The question is, what does that mean? What does it mean that God saw that it was good? And through this, I want to identify what is the purpose of man in this world. So each day God said it was good. And the question is, what does it mean it was good? Does God say it worked? It's pleasing, aesthetically pleasing to me. I like it. What does the word good mean? We understand that the word good means that everything that God created in the physical world, everything that he created, has the potential to reflect God's beneficence, because it's through God's goodness that he chose to create a world and place man in that world. And how do we reflect God's beneficence? By bringing holiness into the world. So therefore, it must be that everything that God created has the potential for holiness. Everything that he created. By the way, it has the potential to be profane as well. And what determines how we derive the good, how we bring the kedusha in Hebrew, the holiness, out of the physical world and into our material world? So the understand that is to understand that man is forced, he's told, what is his role? To be fruitful and multiply, to have dominion over the world, right? To be fruitful and multiply, and to have dominion over the world, and to subdue it. What does that mean? It doesn't mean to exploit the world. It doesn't mean to exploit others. It means that how you utilize everything in the physical world can be either to bring out its holiness and perhaps, God forbid, to profane it as well. Let me give you some examples. Who would have thought that in the bark of some trees along the Amazon River, we could find very, very powerful medicines, things that can cure perhaps or treat cancer? Who would have thought that you could derive from things in the natural world, such important things that help and enhance our lives. Now, at the same time that we can create a drug that can save lives, and by doing that, we elevate that element to a level of holiness. At the same time, we can abuse drugs, right? And profane not only ourselves, but that which God created. And this is true throughout everything in the physical world. By the way, our speech is a very good example of that. And the way that speech is a very good example of that is, and I'm not talking about using clean speech or profane language, but you can save a life with your words. You can destroy and take a life with your words. And we see that quite clearly today on social media, both of those. And this is true throughout the physical world. And as a Jew, and I mentioned as a Jew who observes the laws, Judaism forces us to engage the physical world. And let me explain. You all may well know that on the Sabbath, on Friday nights, and on the eve of all of our biblical holidays, we bring in the holiday, we sanctify the day by making a blessing over a cup of wine. Well, if we're to have wine and we're required to have wine, then we have to be vintners. We have to know how to grow grapes. We have to know how to ferment, crush and ferment the grapes, et cetera, et cetera. We have a holiday called Sukkot where we take 4 vegetative species, fruits and vegetables, we bring them together. The palm branch, the citron, the etro, the river willow, and the myrtle. Well, we have to be horticulturists in order to know how to use these things. And by using them both in their for their main purpose and for these religious expressions, we elevate them and we bring out a certain amount of holiness through our interaction. And to be an observant Jew, you have to be a biologist, you have to be an astronomer, you have to be a horticulturist, I said. In other words, Judaism says, engage the physical world, don't avoid it. Utilize everything that I have created is for your benefit, and for your benefit to utilize in a positive way in order to bring sanctity into the world. And that's a universal concept. That isn't necessarily limited to Judaism. That was given to man, to Adam. That is both, we have even the 7 Noahide laws that apply from Jewish perspective to all humanity. So this idea of engaging the world, not seeking to remove ourselves from the physical world, but engaging the physical and material world is an important part of our identity as human beings and as Jews, both the universal and the particular, that our obligation is to take the physical world and utilize it in a way. How do we know the way? What's the path? That's the path of the rest of the biblical and rabbinic laws that teach us 2 things. How to properly utilize the physical world and what are the limitations. And so we have certain limitations. Everybody has to eat. But the laws of kosher teach us certain limitations, self-limitation. And that is true for every area of our lives. But it also opens up and says to us that, you know what? Every moment of our day is a potential for spiritual engagement with God. In the workplace, in our homes, in our private lives, in our public lives, how we interact with people and with things can be a way to engage with God. Food is a very good example. And we're not the only religion that believes that you make a blessing before you eat. And therefore, just the act of eating, which is a universal need, becomes a spiritual connection to God, giving thanks to God for giving me my food. And when we're finished, we make a blessing as well, blessing God for the bounty that he has bestowed upon us. So that, from the point of view of creation, is the kind of a foundation in what is our role in this world. Our role in this world is to engage the world, but to understand that it's to engage the world for a purpose, to suck out holiness, to basically say we want to reach up and bring God down into this world. And that's the first step in how we live as Orthodox Jews, as observant Jews. Likewise, there is the moral creation that comes about with the sin of Adam and Eve. And I just want to spend a minute on this because I know we're limited in time. One needs to understand, what is the difference between the nature of man and woman, before the sin of eating of the fruit of the tree of good and evil, of knowledge, knowledge of good and evil, and after. And before, from the moment that man was created, you know, there's two accounts of creation in the Bible. Rabbi Soloveitchik goes into great depth in understanding what we learn from the first and second account. The first account basically says that man was an extension of creation. He's a creature like everyone else, and everything else that was created. And man has empirical knowledge. Man, at the moment of his creation, had the ability to look at the world, as I mentioned, the physical world, and determine what is true and what is false. And at the moment of creation, man had the potential to send man to the moon, because empirical knowledge is through experimentation and knowing what is true and what is false, but it has no moral implications. And so man, when first created, and it says right before we're introduced to the serpent and the biblical narrative, we're told that man and woman were both naked and they were not embarrassed. In other words, at that moment in time, man had two things. They knew, yes, true, false. We have clothes, we don't have clothes. But it didn't have any moral implications, because what we call the good inclination, the evil inclination, right? The little angel, the little devil that sits on our shoulder, was at this moment external from man. In fact, the evil inclination at that point in time was represented by the serpent. Enter the serpent. The serpent is temptation. The serpent is passion. The serpent is all of those moral conundrums that we deal with. And the serpent seduces Eve and then Adam into eating of the fruit. And at that moment, they immediately realized they were naked and run and hide to clothe themselves. What happens? That inclination, that evil inclination that was external at that point, becomes internalized. They now have the good inclination and the evil inclination. And there's the other tension. There's the internal tension that every human being struggles with between their moral sides. What is moral? What is immoral? What do I want? What do I need? What am I willing to do? What am I willing to sacrifice? That becomes internalized at that moment in time. And now man, who has both free will and this inclination of good and to do bad, now enters into the world. And that's step number two. So that's from the point of view of creation, to understand the Jewish philosophy of who we are and where we come from. Next, I want to jump ahead to 10 generations. We have from Adam, we have Noah and the flood story. 10 generations after that, we have Abraham. And what, of course, happens in the time of Noah is first we have the destruction of man becoming fully corrupt, morally corrupt, and God, there being consequences, and God giving another chance through Noah. And then we get to the Tower of Babel, and there is the dispersion of man, many languages, different nations, different lands, and the rise of polytheism, of pagan polytheistic practices. And now man is all over the place. Enter Abraham, who is known as being the first Jew. What was it about Abraham that he got the moniker of being the first Jew? So he was the first to come back to a monotheistic understanding that there's only one God, one creator of good and of evil, which is a concept that we struggle to understand. And how did he come to this? It's not in the Bible, but our rabbis teach us that we do know that his father was in Mesopotamia. He made idols. He was an idol maker. And that Abraham, through really examining the world around us, in particular, one day they were at an inn, a grand inn, a nice hotel, and he realized that a building like that required an architect. Somebody had to figure out how all the pieces of this building come together to work so beautifully, where the rooms are, where the stairs are, where everything is, and somebody has to maintain it. And through that, he realized that the world implies a creator. If you look at the universe and the world, how it functions, it implies that there has to be one creator. And it's at that point, of course, that God enters the scene with Abraham and says, go forth And here is very interesting. What does he tell Abraham? He tells Abraham to go on a journey, but it's not just a physical journey. He says to him, go forth from your land, your country, from your birthplace, from your father's house. Well, that's really backwards. If I first leave my home, right, then I leave my state, and then I leave my country. It's the wrong direction. The truth is that while it was a physical journey, it was also a spiritual journey, inward. He was moving closer and closer to his core, peeling away the culture of the land that he lived in, of Mesopotamia, of Shinar, of the tribe that he was in, and finally his father's house. And that's why he's known as, in Hebrew, he's known as Abraham HaIvri. Ivri is the word from which Ivrit, Hebrew, comes from. Abraham, the Hebrew. The word Ivri means the one who passed over, to cross over. Not only did he cross over the river Euphrates, but he also crossed over culturally from polytheism to monotheism. And at that moment, in chapter 15 of Genesis, God makes his first covenant with Abraham. And it's a covenant now that it's more particularistic. We go from the universal, from mankind, to his relationship with Abraham. And he makes a covenant with him. A covenant is a two-way commitment. And he tells Abraham that if you will, continue to teach and preach monotheism, that I promise that you will have offspring, you will be a great nation, nations will be blessed through you, in you. We know that Abraham, by the way, was very universalistic in his preaching. He had a tent that was open, right, in all four directions. People would come and he would give them food and lodging, and they would ask them, would teach them about God. At the same time, however, here you have that tension. Only one of his children, right, not Ishmael, but Isaac, is to continue in the covenantal relationship. And with Isaac, right, not Esau, but Jacob, was to continue in the covenantal relationship. And this we call the patriarchal covenant that God makes. It's the beginning of not yet the Jewish people, but I would call the Jewish clan. And what God tells Abraham in that first covenant is that, listen, before your descendants will become a nation, know for sure that it's going to be trial by fire. They're going to be, right, in a land, a strange land. They're going to be indentured in that land, and they're going to suffer in that land. And only then will they go free, right? But they'll go free with great wealth. And the truth is, if we jump ahead to the Egyptian experience, the bondage in Egypt, the Jewish people do ultimately leave, both with material wealth and with spiritual wealth, which I want to focus on because that's this idea of revelation. So we have God's revelation to Abraham and the patriarchs and the matriarchs. I'm not going to give you a full Bible history. You should be somewhat familiar with that narrative. We come down to Egypt, and now the Jewish people are suffering, and God calls upon Moses. And it's very interesting. Moses, as you know, was raised in the palace of Pharaoh by Pharaoh's daughter, and is raised as a prince of Egypt. But when he becomes older, he was also, his mother was his wet nurse and taught him. He knew that tension between being a prince of Egypt, and yet he knew he was born of the Hebrews, of the Israelites. And on the first day, when he becomes a young adult, he goes out to see the suffering of his fellow Jews. And he sees the Egyptian smiting the Jew, and he smites the Egyptian. The next day, he has to flee and go up to Midian. He's gone for 40 years, becomes a shepherd for his father-in-law, Yitro. So Moses never really participated in any of the suffering of the Jews in Egypt. But one day, as you all may know, he's shepherding his father-in-law's sheep, and there he sees an amazing sight. He sees the burning bush, and God calls out to him. It's very interesting. The first thing God says to him is, take off your shoes because you're on holy land. Why did he have to take off his shoes? What does it mean that he was on holy land? What God was telling him is, you can't have a truly spiritual experience, and you can't really empathize with the Jewish people if you have a barrier between yourself and what they are feeling. Take off your shoes, stand on the ground. You have to feel the ground with your feet. You have to be able to empathize with what they are, with their suffering. And Moses does that and more. The key critical idea of the Exodus that I want to share with you in the time that I have is just prior to the Exodus. We all know the story, the Passover night. God tells the Jewish people that they undertake a ritual, part of which we do every year on Passover, which was to take a lamb, right, to offer it, you're going to eat that lamb in households that gather together. You're not to leave that house, because that night will be the 10th plague, the plague of the death of the firstborn. And there's one other thing I want you to do. I want you to take blood from that lamb and put it on the doorpost of your home. And therefore, I will know when I pass over not to smite the firstborn of the Jews. Let me ask you a question. If God is God and he's all-knowing, why does he need blood on the doorposts to know that this is a Jewish home and that's an Egyptian home? That makes no sense. So what was the purpose of this ritual? So there are two opinions. It depends whether you say that they were to put the blood on the outside of the doorpost or was it on the inside. Those that say it was on the outside was to show that they're not afraid of the Egyptians. Let the Egyptians know what we're doing. We're not afraid. We believe in God. The others, most of the commentaries, however, say that the blood went on the inside because it wasn't enough for the Jews to say, I believe. They had to show and manifest their belief in action. And putting the blood on the doorpost was an action that God could see by them taking the step of actually slaughtering the lamb and putting its blood on the doorpost. They took their belief and put it into action. We know, according to tradition, that many of the Jews never left Egypt. There were many Jews that were so taken by Egyptian culture, they didn't participate in the Passover ritual, and they never left Egypt. We learn from this an important principle, which is my purpose here, is that in Judaism, belief is very important, but even more than belief is action. I often describe the difference between somebody who's a cardiac Jew. I believe in my heart, but Rabbi, Shabbat, keeping the Sabbath, keeping kosher, keeping all the laws, I can't really do that. In Judaism, in Orthodox Judaism, I call that a cardiac Jew, a Jew in their heart. But a truly Orthodox, orthoprax Jew understands that while belief is critical, one has to put into action. There's a famous debate in the Talmud about what's more important, belief in God or observing the commandments. It's an intense debate. In the end, they say doing the commandments are more important than belief in God. How does that makes no sense. If you don't have a commander, how can you have a command? If I don't believe in God, then how can I believe that I have to observe this commandment if I don't believe in the commander? So the Talmud gives the following answer, says, understand, the laws of the Bible are intended to create a fully actualized human being, one who understands his role in the material, physical world, and in the spiritual world. And someone who observes those commandments is a fully actualized person, will come to understand, just like Abraham, will come to belief in God. But somebody can believe in God and stop there and not follow through on any of the commandments. That's only half a person, only half of an actualized Jew. And so the second point that I want to make is that in Judaism, there's this tension between creed and deed, between belief and action. When we talk about, I was often asked when I would go on seeking positions, which I haven't, thank God, having to do too many times, only twice in 36 years, was, Rabbi, what's your definition of a good Jew? It's always a trap question. My answer always is, any Jew trying to become a better Jew, that it's striving to do more and to be more. We know many, many very, very observant, religious Jews in terms of ritual, but they're not very, very observant in terms of interpersonal relationships. And they're very good in the commandments between man and God, between them and God, and not very good in the commandments between man and fellow man. And we know plenty of people the other way around. A pious, now both of them have very positive qualities. I know some very, very outstanding, kind, generous, giving, self-sacrificing Jews who are not ritually observant. And I know many ritually observant Jews who are not very nice people. Neither of them are pious. To be a pious Jew, to be a fully actualized Jew in the modern world means to bring those two together. And again, there's tension in trying to do that and accomplish that. So revelation, when God revealed himself on Mount Sinai, and that's a very, very important critical stage in Judaism, was that revelation took place in front of the entire nation. And if you read the biblical narrative, it's interesting, if I had time for a class, that it's not clear if the intention was originally just for Moses to go up or for all the people to participate. So it seems that all the people wanted to participate until after God gave the 10 commandments. They said, you know what, this is a little too intense spiritually for us. We're not prophets like Moses. Moshe, you go up and get the rest of the commandments and bring them down to us. And that's why all of Israel heard from God the 10 commandments, and the rest were given over the next 40 days and 40 nights to Moses. But what is critical, and Maimonides, one of the great philosophers and codifiers of Judaism, said that the fact that every single Jew saw, observed Moshe going up to the mountain and communing with God established the veracity of Moses as the lawgiver. In other words, never was it to think that Moses was acting on his own and making up laws on his own, that he was a true prophet of God. Through that revelation, everybody saw that God was communing with Moses, and that would be known. People being human beings, however, gets the next part. So you would think, great. And then what? Immediately after revelation at Mount Sinai, we have a group of Jews who sin with the golden calf. And tragic occurrence, and God is ready to break the covenant. If it weren't for Moses pleading with them. And this leads to the third idea, that of redemption, of forgiveness, and how forgiveness works in Judaism. If you accept that Judaism is primarily about observance and observing the law, moral laws, ritual laws, there's a lot of laws, and it's not always possible. Even the most pious Jew sins at some point, intentionally, unintentionally. And in that case, if I sin, then how do I ever get out of that sinfulness in Judaism? So enter the idea of teshuvah, of repentance in Judaism, which is perhaps the most important idea or ideal, one of the most important ideals in Judaism, that it is on our shoulders both to bear the responsibility to be halachic man, to observe. It is also on our shoulders to know when we have failed and to seek out penitence. And if we've sinned against another person, we have to seek out that person and ask that person for forgiveness. And we have to seek out God as well. We do that on Yom Kippur, as many of you well know. That's when we seek out penance or atonement from God. And if you think about it, what is repentance? Repentance in Hebrew is return, right? We want to return to that relationship with God that has been sullied, if not broken, through our transgressions. And that creates distance. It creates plaque between us and God, plaque on our souls, so to speak. So we want to return to God. That's what we do. We repent. What does God do? God atones. Think about it. What is atonement? If you look at the word, atonement means at one-ment. We want to regain that at one-ment with God. And so we repent, and God gives us atonement. And we are constantly struggling with that to atone for our sins. Thank God we have a couple of intense weeks during the year, days during the year, in which we are dedicated to that effort. And it is through that effort that we are able to kind of redirect, reroute ourselves, kind of like when our Waze, when we don't follow the directions on our GPS, it will, redirecting, recalculating. That allows us to recalculate our path, right, that we follow in our effort to realize this idea of how do we actualize ourselves as human beings, as Jews, in our relationship with others, in our relationship with God. That is, in essence, what Judaism is about. One last thought, and then I will hand the program back over, and afterwards I'll answer any questions that you might have. Hopefully, this is giving you a foundation to understand that what some people might think is, wow, you must live, you're so guided by so many rules and regulations. And the answer is it's an open window. It allows us to engage with God. And as I mentioned, we bring God into our world. And a great example of that is the Sabbath. As you very well know, on the seventh day, God rested. What does it mean he rested? It means he ceased creating. He ceased having mastery over the physical world. And we emulate God. We give testimony to God as creator that on the seventh day, we also cease from mastery over our physical world. And it's not about, when we cease from work, it doesn't mean physical labor. It means creative control over our environment. So for example, we don't turn a light switch on Shabbat. Now you would think, what kind of work is that? No effort in turning on a light switch. Even today, I can just speak to my phone and it can turn on and off lights. There's no effort in that. But there's unbelievable mastery over my environment. Think about it. What was the first thing God said? Let there be light. That was the number one change in the creation of the world. Let there be light. Let there be energy, the Big Bang. So we don't master our universe even by turning a light on or off, bringing light or darkness. Now, there are workarounds because we have to be able to do certain things, and God wants us to do certain things on the Sabbath and not do other things. But this is a good example, and I'm going to let some of our teams talk about their Shabbat experiences, their Shabbat tensions in a few minutes. But this idea of why were we created and how do we emulate God as creators in this world, creators of goodness and of sanctity? Number one, revelation that God chose us, and by chosenness is not an elite status, but it's particular to our role, that we have a particular role that God has expectations of us, and we can discuss that perhaps at another time. And ultimately, that redemption comes about both through our fulfilling our mission, our repentance when we fail. And let me just end with this last thought about redemption, that we all know that it seems that this world is an unjust world. If God is all-knowing, God is all-powerful, and man has free will, how is it that, and man should be rewarded for what he does right and punished for what he does bad, how is it that the righteous suffer and evildoers prosper in this world? And the answer is that this world is not the ultimate world. We believe in an afterlife in the world to come. We believe that in that world, the world of the spirits, that there is great reward and that a final judgment comes at the end of our lives. And that what we sometimes see as the wicked prospering is God saying, I owe them for the good that they did in this world. I'm going to give it to them in this physical world. Their spiritual reward may not be as great. And for those that are righteous who seem to suffer, it's, listen, this is their punishment for what they did wrong in this world, but the reward in the afterlife will be very, very great. And that is very critical to our belief in how we live our lives and why we want to rectify our sins, because we want that our afterlife should be hopefully as good as, if not better than our lives in this world. With that, I hope that I've given you a foundation. I'm sure there's many questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Steve and our teams.
Rabbi, thank you very much. I mean, that was outstanding, and I've been a Jew for 71 years, and I learned a great deal tonight, so thank you. Again, we're very fortunate to have several of Rabbi Zach's students with us this evening. We've got a couple questions, and I think what I'd like to do is I'm going to throw the question out, and then I'd like to go through a response from all four of the students. And I'll turn to you, but if you could introduce yourself by telling us what grade you're in. I think all of you are at Columbus Torah Academy, one of our 2 day schools here in Columbus. but if you could indicate what grade you're in, that would be helpful. My first question is, we've heard the rabbi go through the background, the construct of what it is to be an Orthodox Jew. But in particular, what does being an Orthodox Jew mean to you? And Hannah, I'm going to start with you. If you could unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah. So I'm Hannah. I go to Columbus Torah Academy. I'm in 12th grade. I think being in, actually, can you ask the question again?
What does being an observant Orthodox Jew mean to you?
I think it means incorporating God into my everyday life and just having God with whatever I do, even if it's the smallest thing.
Okay. All right, great. Saul?
Hi, I'm Saul, and I'm in 12th grade, and I'm at CTA with Jonathan and Hannah. Let me answer the same question you just asked Hannah.
Yes.
So what being an Orthodox Jew really means to me is really doing the things I do for a higher purpose than the rest of society might. For instance, while some people may be driven by money or other people may think of them, as an Orthodox Jew, I strive to not do things for maybe money, but with some of the things I do throughout my day and my week, I do to please God and to maybe better myself. And I'm obviously not perfect with this, but the most important thing is that I try and strive every day to do that.
Okay, thank you. Yaki?
Hi, I'm Yaki. I'm in 11th grade at CTA. And to me, being an Orthodox Jew means that God and his commandments are my priority, and they come first. And so, pretty much anything else takes a backseat to that.
Okay. And Yaakov?
Hi, I'm Yaakov. I'm in 11th grade. To me, being an Orthodox Jew means following the commandments that God gave the Jews to the best of my ability. And sometimes that can be difficult, but really trying my best to follow God's will and always improve.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to get a little more specific. As a modern Orthodox Jewish teenager, what parts of contemporary society are you comfortable embracing? And what parts do you feel compelled to avoid or reject? And again, I want to go back to the rabbi's, one of his earliest statements, that as Jews, we engage with the world, but there's a lot of world out there. There's a lot that happens in secular society, social media, etc. So again, the question is, as an Orthodox Jewish teenager, an observant teenager, with contemporary society, what are you comfortable being able to embrace? And what aspects of this society do you feel you want to avoid or reject? Hannah?
I think a lot of it has to do with the social scene, for me at least. For example, I know a lot of people who aren't Orthodox or of different religions. They'll, for example, go to a restaurant to, see their friends or family. But I think keeping kosher, I think a lot of us can't, modern Orthodox Jews can't do that. But I think we keep that same idea, we just execute it differently. So for example, we will, on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, we'll all go to somebody's house and do the same thing, but just in a different way.
A different way, a more constrained setting, but something where you can effectively observe the rituals, but get some of the same social engagement out of it. Okay, great. Saul?
Hi. So, as a modern Orthodox Jew in contemporary society, with coronavirus, like, it's kind of a hard question because, like, I don't necessarily get a glimpse into contemporary society because, I go to school and then I go home, and when I'm on Zoom, I only see my friends. But really what I get a more accurate glimpse is when we go on away games for baseball, or maybe I go to the mall or something. But really what I embrace is like movies and TV shows, and like which some Jews may reject. Like I watch movies and I like TV shows, and especially I love sports and I love to follow sports. I myself am a big Houston Rockets fan. It's not going very well right now, but we'll get there. I really try to stray away and reject, like, not necessarily reject, but try and hold back from social media. I think it's a distraction and really is not like a great influence at times. I did try to distract myself from non-modest situations, places where there just won't be modest things, and really overall like drugs and stuff like that.
Okay. So I don't know if you knew, a couple weeks ago there was an article about a young Jewish baseball player who actually preferred being a catcher because a catcher has to be rested for a couple days between games, and his day of rest was going to be on the Jewish Sabbath on Shabbat. So good luck in your future professional baseball career. Yaki?
So I understand, as a teenager and as a modern Orthodox Jew, I definitely understand, the pull towards social media and, Snapchat and Instagram and, all those things. And so I think it's important to keep like a healthy balance. And so I've definitely veered away from much of it because I think that too much of it can be very unhealthy. But I use it sometimes just to stay in touch and, try and not live in a bubble or under a rock. And beyond that, I like to surround myself in situations where I'm going to feel comfortable, where it's going to be, easy for me to maintain my Judaism, such as, going to a Jewish camp, or when I go to college, making sure it has a thriving Jewish environment so that I'm constantly surrounded by Jews to help me maintain my Judaism. And so that's kind of like a barrier that I've set up.
Okay, thank you. Yaakov?
So for the most part, I feel like as a teenager, I can interact with society. I mean, I speak the languages. I speak the language. I enjoy movies and sports, and I appreciate like Western style and all of that stuff. And for the most part, I feel like I'm able to interact with society. The main thing that I feel compelled to reject, or at least avoid, is a bit more broad than what Yaki and Saul said, is just the ideas that seems to be a bit more prevalent nowadays, that like our natural or animalistic instincts should be pursued, and social media may definitely be an example of that. The idea that just because we have a desire for something, whether it's desire for good or bad, that's something that we should do, even if it's not necessarily for good. I mean, in Judaism, we believe that of course you can have desires to do wrong. I mean, a negative commandment you can't even fulfill unless if you have a desire to do it, and you hold back from it and don't do it. As the rabbi mentioned, we believe in good inclinations and bad inclinations, and we have bad inclinations, and we should avoid that. So I think that that's the main thing that I would take issue with in our society, modern.
All right, thank you. My next question really relates to Shabbat, to the Sabbath. Hannah, can you give us just a glimpse as to how you observe Shabbat?
So on Shabbat, I usually go to Torah Emet, to the synagogue, in the morning for prayers. And then I come home. Or go to someone's house outside, of course. We have a nice meal, a nice lunch, and then in the afternoon, it's very relaxed. You go to your friend's house, you can see people. Just the main thing is, I guess, not using electronics or going in your car. Yeah.
Okay. Saul?
Yeah, Shabbat from I guess as a teenager and someone who needs constant entertainment, Shabbat can sometimes be a little boring. But as I've matured over the years, my view on Shabbat has really changed, because throughout the week we're very busy with maybe schoolwork or baseball or just whatever we're doing. And Shabbat is really a Jewish way of taking really a step back and really realizing what truly matters and what we really want to focus on, and remember what really matters. So on Shabbos, for instance, we pray longer to remember that, God is really what we're doing all of this for. That's why we're here. That's why he put us here. He put us here for a reason, and that's why we're here. We on Shabbos afternoons, I like to go hang out with Yaki and Newman, and maybe I play pickleball or basketball, or obviously Corona, we can't do much of that, but I used to. But so it's really a weekly wake-up call to remember that maybe our phone and our schoolwork, while it does matter, we do have higher purposes that we have a calling to in our life. And yeah.
Okay, good. Yaki?
Shabbat is my favorite day of the week, hands down. I think I can really embrace the way that we're supposed to rest, or think of Shabbos as a day of rest, the way God took a day of rest after 6 days of creation. And so it really just being able to separate from everything that's outside and just, focus on reading a book and hanging out with friends, and even just going for a nice walk is so relaxing, and it re-energizes me, and it resets me for the coming week. And one of my favorite things to do on Shabbat is when, oftentimes, all the boys in our high school get together and on a Friday night, and we'll just sing Jewish songs and hang out and hear words of Torah. And that's one of my favorite things that I get to do, at all.
Okay. Thanks. Yaakov?
Shabbat's amazing. It's a self-help day almost. It's after the stress of a long week of having a long week of work, schoolwork, or just regular work. Having a day where we just sit down, we rest, we forget about all of we're not supposed to think about work or about schoolwork or any of that stuff, not supposed to partake in it. Just have a day of rest, a day where we we put away our phones and TV, and it's a day where we interact more with the real world, and it's like a day for building relationships with others and building relationships with God and improving ourselves. And it's just a nice, relaxing day. It's really re-energizing, and it's amazing.
Good, thank you. My last question kind of relates back to what we were talking about before, that we've got this surrounding world that is overwhelmingly not an observant Jewish world. And I think the question we wanted to pose for you is there something in particular as an observant Jew that you feel you're missing out on, something that is happening in the world that you feel in a different situation you could take part of, but that you're missing out on? Hannah?
Honestly, there are some times where I do feel like I'm missing out on, I don't know, various activities, I guess. Just, the world moves so quickly, and to not be connected to the outside world for a whole day can be hard sometimes. But on the other hand, there, like on Shabbat, like as the boys were saying, there's so much spirituality and opportunity to build connections with other people and to really like develop your community. I think it's definitely something that shouldn't be taken for granted, and I don't think I feel like I'm missing out very often.
Okay, so
Yeah, so I guess you could say that I feel like I miss out sometimes. Like there's a lot, like when I was like in 11th and 10th grade, I wanted to like go, I was very into basketball. Before Corona, we didn't get to have a basketball season this year, but I've been very into basketball. And I wanted to play in like tournaments, but most of them were on Shabbos, so I couldn't go. And so I guess you could say there I felt missing out. But I mean, I guess another example is in Columbus, as through the eyes of other Jewish communities, we have a lack of kosher restaurants. So I guess I feel like missing out when I can't go to a restaurant. Like I see all these restaurants, they smell so good when I walk by them, but I can't eat anything there. Also, the freedom of being able to walk into Kroger or something and just being able to take something off the shelf and not having to check for a kosher hechsher or a kosher sign. But also, I guess I could say there are times where I'm prideful that I'm missing out because, I have people surrounding me that I'm missing out with, and we all get to miss out together. And it's a much different feeling than if I was missing out just me. But since I'm missing out with a whole group of people and we're doing it for a higher purpose and for God, it's very prideful, and it like gives life, I guess, much more meaning in very small areas.
Okay, thanks. Yaki?
I don't often think that I miss out. I feel very lucky that I get to be Jewish. And so, even if I don't get to eat at a restaurant, which would be nice so often, I overall think that, that I'm very grateful to have all the positives that come with being Jewish.
Okay. And Yaakov.
Yeah, so maybe there's some things that I miss that I don't get to do or don't get to take part in, like going to restaurants or watching a game on Shabbat, or maybe there's things that I miss, but I don't necessarily feel like I miss out on things, because maybe just because I'm missing something, it's not necessarily a negative thing where it would have been better in another circumstance if I had gotten to do it. I think that everything has meaning, and the fact that I'm missing it, I'm able to take something from it, and it's actually a pro.
All right, you've all done a wonderful job. We appreciate your taking part in the program tonight. I think you all have a bright future. And we're going to open it up now to general questions for Rabbi Zach, and then if there are questions for the youth panel as well. Rabbi, we had a couple questions that came in related to Jews' relationship to other faiths. You know, we said at the very beginning, the Interfaith Association is representative of 9 faith groups, the majority of which are non-Abrahamic. So I think my question for you would be, based on a couple that came over the transom from the group, how do Jews view a relationship with other non-Jewish faiths?
So I think to an extent very favorably, certainly in the modern Orthodox world. It's first of all, as I mentioned, we're all part of the same human race. So there are coalitions that are important. Some of the things that are going on now in our country, in our community, require all of us to be engaged. Now, as a rabbi of a congregation, it's not always possible to be involved in everything, and there aren't that many, Jewish congregations in all of Columbus, Central Ohio. So it's hard for us to keep up with all of our co-religionists, certainly in the Christian faith, of which there are many, many, churches and denominations, and more people and more congregants to be involved in these things. Our congregation in the past has been involved in the March for against human trafficking. We've been involved in many other community efforts and engaging in conversations like this. Obviously, there are times where we're there as a community for mutual concerns. There's times that we're there to support our co-religionists, and sometimes we want them to support us. And so you can't have that if you don't have an ongoing relationship on your core principles.
We had a follow-up question that is probably, I'm going to say, borderline political, but it's asking why, if God has created all of us, in particular, I'm going to add this, Abraham's sons, Isaac and Ishmael, why in contemporary society is there tension between Jews and Muslims? And is there tension between Judaism and Islam?
So that's a very multifaceted, the answer to that is very multifaceted, and a lot of it is history lesson, and we don't have a lot of time. So let me summarize on 2 levels. On one level, it's, if two bodies can't occupy the same space at the same time. And so if we're all laying claims to some of the same things, but we're claiming it completely, then we can't occupy that space. And there's, historically, whether we're talking about Jerusalem, or whether we're talking about certain religious beliefs or practices, if we believe that it's us and only us and there's no room for anybody else, then there's going to be those tensions. It's very interesting. I just had a book group here. We just finished reading one of, if you've never read Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sacks, he passed away this past year. He was the past chief rabbi of Great Britain. He was knighted by the Queen. He is an incredible philosopher, rabbi, and universalist. And he wrote a book called Not in God's Name, where he talks about exactly this issue, that it's really because of our allowing our tribalistic, baser instincts to overtake our universalistic commonalities. And it's interesting. He reads the Bible, certain stories in the Bible, where he reads the whole story of Jacob when he goes back to meet his brother Jacob. If you do know the biblical narrative, you don't. So Isaac, in his old age, wants to impart his blessing to his son, so to go to his elder son, Esau. And Jacob, with the support of his mother, the instigation of his mother, actually, quote unquote, steals the blessing, dresses up as his brother and gets the blessing instead. And Isaac, and so there's not the same blessing for Esau, and he's determined, he says he's going to kill his brother. So his brother has to leave. He leaves for like 22 years. After 22 years, he's going back to meet his brother. And Rabbi Jacob reads that very beautifully. Oh, thank you. Reads that as his desire to re-engage his brother, they really wanted to overcome their differences. Most reads of that text, that narrative, don't see it that way. So if you want that book and his most recent book, which we're now doing, which called Morality, are really fantastic. They're not written for Jews. They're written for human beings. And they deal with these questions of why can't we, as the human race, regardless of our religion or non-religion, see our mission as being one. So I really recommend that text, Not in God's Name and Morality by Dr. Sachs, Rabbi Dr. Sachs.
All right, thanks. We had a question related to the environment. And I think you mentioned at the very beginning, God gave us in Genesis dominion, but not necessarily domination. And the question is, how does, and we have it from Reverend Cornett, particularly, I think, both the creation story and Psalm 8 play out in Judaism's approach to environmentalism, climate change, and global warming?
So we have an obligation to be responsible shepherds. So these are universal as well as Jewish, should be Jewish concerns that we share a planet. I share it with my fellow Jews. I share it with my co-religionists. I share it with every other human being. And when we pollute the earth, I believe we're doing just the opposite of what I spoke about. We're abusing what God gave us. God gave us everything we need. And, each generation has an obligation to refine itself, not to make itself, one point, coal, fossil fuels were the way that the world was able to become more industrialized, more modern, if you will. And there was a price to pay for that. But now we don't have to rely on fossil fuels. There are other ways to attain that. And we'll find, even atomic energy was, a more efficient, but not necessarily a cleaner form of energy, because there are all kinds of dangers, as we know, associated with atomic energy. And so we are accountable. And if we don't hold ourselves accountable, God will hold us accountable.
Rabbi, I have a question about the rise in anti-Semitism in this country over the course of the last several years. I think it's part of a general milieu in our society. Many of the people on the call, I think, are well schooled in the history of anti-Semitism. Others may not be. Do you have any wisdom you can share with us, not just by virtue of, how this is being played out in society, but also from a practical perspective, what we can do not only with anti-Semitism, but with Islamophobia. We've had a spate of actions against Asian American Pacific Islanders in the course of the last several weeks. But in particular, anti-Semitism, I think, security is something we're very concerned about in the Jewish community. And I would just appreciate your perspective on it.
So, I think it's not just about anti-Semitism. I get my dander up with both my congregants and maybe some of my other co-religionist Jews. Everything, as you mentioned, everything is up, and racism. And so it all comes, now it's very troubling, obviously, as a Jew, anti-Semitism, but it's about, again, I'll go back to Jonathan Sachs's phraseology, it's about this rise in tribalism. It's about this pushback. It's not in the United States, and I think throughout the Western world, we're in a cultural war, unfortunately. And against, what we always took pride, at least when I was a child in public school, in the American melting pot experience was something to take pride in, right? That we all came from somewhere else, and many of us came from somewhere else, if not one generation, 2 generations, 5 generations. And we all, you know, built America. My parents, my grandparents, my mother was born in Germany, came over 2 years old, just, you know, as the beginning of the rise of Hitler. With my grandparents, they lost much of their family there. And they came and they made their life just like many, many other nationalities and people. But as quote unquote, as the percentage of minorities, right, has reached in the last decade or so, maybe 2 decades, parity and maybe beyond, you know, what is considered the, you know, white America, if I could use that phrase. Now we're suddenly finding ourselves in all of this tribalistic turmoil that's really fueling all of the social ills that we're dealing with. And, you know, depending on where you stand on that side of that cultural war, but what has been unleashed is this idea that it's okay. You know, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Everybody's entitled to their free speech. But when free speech leads to hate and actions that lead to violence and injury, that's not okay. But it's somehow been mainstream, unfortunately, both in our political and in some cases in our religious spheres. And so it's a danger for our society in general. It's as dangerous for African Americans as it is for Jews, as it is for those of the Islamic faith, and for LGBT Q community. It goes to the soul of humanity, the soul of who we are, and we have to take steps to not allow whataboutism to keep us from solving these problems. And what there was an article, I think, just in the Tribune, in the Dispatch a couple of days ago, using that phrase, whataboutism, when somebody tries to deal with attacks against members of faith of Islam, Muslims, so the Jewish would say, well, what about anti-Semitism? Yeah, well, that's not an excuse to not deal with the other thing. They're both bad. We've got to deal with all of it. We have to have sympathy and empathy. You know, a good friend of mine, a congregant, had a very beautiful insight when the protests were first starting, and there were rallies at downtown Columbus over this last summer even, and there was a lot of Black Lives Matter protests. And so some of those in my congregation would say, well, you know, what about anti-Semitism? You know, that's also, you know, we have a concept in Judaism about mourning, about comforting mourners. You know, in the 7 days after a person loses a close relative, it's our tradition, it's an obligation to go to the house of the mourner and to comfort the mourner. But Jewish law, this is another area where halakha, where Jewish law is so beautiful. The law is that you're not supposed to speak first when you go to comfort a mourner. You enter their house, you sit down, and you don't speak until the mourner speaks. And then you don't then tell the mourner all about your tragedy and how you dealt with the loss of a family member. That's not comforting to a mourner. What's comforting to a mourner is you're sitting there as a friend and a member of the community saying in silence, I am here with you, I am here for you. That's my role, to comfort somebody who is suffering, right? To be an active listener and to let them know I'm here for you. And that's what this person said to members of our community. Stop with the whataboutism. Now is the time for us to be silent. Yes, there'll be a time to raise our voice about anti-Semitism. Now is the time for us to be not be silent on the issue, but to listen, to be active listeners, to understand what their life is like and what they're dealing with, and to be empathetic, and then to act on that. It's not time for us to say, yes, we have our complaints as well, because that's what then happens, the cacophony of everybody complaining about their hurts and their injustices, and we're all victims, and nobody's solving any problems. So that's really my take on both anti-Semitism. Listen, we have to stand up against anti-Semitism. It's irrational. It's irrational. It's about scapegoating. It's about always finding something to point the finger at, to say my life isn't as good as it should be because of that person or that group of people. And that's what anti-Semitism is all about. And we have to fight it. But we can't just fight anti-Semitism. We have to fight social injustice.
Rabbi, thank you very much. We had a couple other diverse questions. One of them was your relationship with Reform and conservative Jews. If you could just make a quick, we're dealing with modern Orthodox.
Right. So in many ways, it's easier dealing with interfaith relations than intra-Jewish relations. There's the famous story about the Jew who was stranded on a desert island for several decades, and he was finally rescued. And they came in the helicopter, they got off, and he wanted to show them all the things he had built. He had built practically a city on this island, and they noticed that there were 2 synagogues on the island. And he said, why do you have 2 synagogues? He says, oh, that's the one I won't step a foot in. So we're a stiff-necked people, and we argue about a lot of things. And obviously, we argue about matters of faith, but we come together on so many other things. We didn't even talk about, modern Orthodoxy and the importance of the support, what Israel means, Israel historically, Israel biblically, Israel, the modern state of Israel means to Jews and to religious Zionists in particular, but to all Jews. So we come together. We have a board of rabbis, in which there's great fealty amongst the rabbis and the board of rabbis, and we come together to deal with Jewish communal issues and support each other. The non-Orthodox will support us in kashrut issues and other issues, and vice versa. We come together to commemorate Holocaust Remembrance Day as a community. We come together to celebrate Israel Independence Day and other holidays together. But then there are things that we don't agree on, or can't, where we have different religious principles about, and we hopefully agree to disagree, but we don't let that create, for most of us, any permanent rift in our community. Now, that isn't true everywhere, and there are a lot of intra-religious issues within the Jewish community, and we do our best. We do our best, like any group.
Well, great. Well, Rabbi and students, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. We deeply appreciate it. And to continue that discussion of appreciation, I'm going to turn the program over to Karen Dawson, the president of the Interfaith Association of Central Ohio, who will close this evening's program. Thanks again.
It's not Karen Dawson. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Karen Dawson. I'm serving this year as president of the Interfaith Association of Central Ohio. It was a wonderful program. I guess I have the honor of basically thanking people, which is always nice, fun, and very important tonight. So Rabbi Zach, thank you so much for opening up just the wonderful information you both shared, as well as bringing the wonderful youth from the Columbus Torah Academy to be with us as well. They were very special. I have grandchildren of the same ages, and I am very impressed with the young people from your congregation. I also want to thank the audience. A number of interesting comments that I noticed in the chat box, good questions, and it pointed out to me once again why it's important to hold these sessions. As Skip Cornett mentioned in the beginning, the Interfaith Association, the mission statement is that we want to create a vibrant interfaith community based on understanding, friendship, and trust. And one of the important ways we do that is by educating ourselves and the general public about the customs and practices of all our 9 faith traditions. And you can see some pictures there, some of our projects. Just want to mention, because I was looking at who's attending tonight, and we have individuals from all 9 of our faith traditions. Besides Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Baha'i, Buddhist, Islam, Sikh, Jain, and Unitarian Universalists. And so bringing them all together, and you can see the names up there, it's a really important opportunity to be able to share important information about Orthodox Judaism, which I think for many of us, we don't know that much about, and it becomes an important first step in building friendship and trust is to build understanding. We have planned in the next several months to also have an opportunity to do a program with the Jain faith and the Sikh faith and the Buddhist faith. And as you can see on the screen, we have a website. We'll also let you know as those programs are coming up. And as we learn more about each other, as we're able to participate in joint programming, Rabbi Sack, I think it is one of the ways we do try to break down tribalism. I think tribalism is oftentimes because they're the others that we don't know anything about and they seem strange to us, or they have strange dietary habits or whatever. And so it's when we get to know people and more about them and build those relationships, I think that's the way we try to decrease the tribalism that we're all facing today. I'd also like to mention that at the end of the program, you will receive a short feedback sheet from the Interfaith Association of Central Ohio, the office. It contains only a few questions. Please fill it out. Will take just a few minutes, but we're really interested in your feedback. It helps us plan our programming, and it also helps us get your ideas of other things and other programming that you'd like us to be able to offer. So after you answer the questions, just click on the form and it'll be returned to the office. We also welcome you if you'd like to become a member of the Interfaith Association of Central Ohio. There's a nominal fee. It's $30 an individual or $50 for 2 people in the same household. But so that we welcome that as well. And I think we realize that really together we can do more and we can be supporters for each other. I'd like to just end by saying that in this difficult and stressful pandemic time, we hope you are all staying safe and healthy. We look forward to a time soon, we hope, when we have enough people vaccinated so that we can once again be together in person. In the meantime, we send our regards to you and your families, and thank you again for being here tonight with us. Good night.